Everybody, thank you. Hello and welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio today. This program is called Lost in Translation. Now, when I picked this out, it didn't occur to me that's actually also the title of a movie. So our guest, Diana Ballard, indicated that to me. And we started talking about the movie in our prep. And so you're going to get to hear some of that because communication is a journey. And just because we say words doesn't mean that we're actually understood. And then you take that and you amplify it or dig in a little bit more. And whose responsibility is it to make sure understanding happens, where it happens at, and why it's so important? Whether we're both speaking English or we're speaking different languages, the same concepts apply. And in fact, the less we have in common and the less we know someone, maybe everything is more. There's more attention and intention that must go into it. And I say maybe because we're going to dig into that and find out. I would like to introduce you to Diana, whom you will get to see again in just a couple of minutes. She was on a show with us recently. And so you know that she is the Senior Vice President of Sales, and she heads up new market development in the US for the Star Group's content strategy, translation solutions, and a suite of technologies that unifies the end-to-end information cycle, regardless of the language that it's in. And in fact, because we speak different languages in multiple languages, you will get to hear from Diana Ballard right after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
And here's Jess.
Right on. So Diana and I are set. We both have cups of teas, even though it is very different times of day. Show them your cup for anybody who's watching our live stream or chooses to tune in later on YouTube. Look at this cute lamb cup. Tell us, where did you get it? I forgot already.
Well, it's I love it because it has sheep on it, and I speak to you from Wales today, which of course is synonymous with many sheep. So I can see them outside. Well, it would if it wasn't so dark. So I love this cup because it's huge and I love tea, and it's just a really nice cup. So that's my cup story.
I'm always interested in cups, and it looks big. It looks, it's not like
it's huge.
Bigger than a regular cup of tea.
We're talking reservoir.
Oh, I love speaking with you for so many reasons. One, because I know I'm going to laugh. Two, because my vocabulary gets expanded. Everybody who's listening, I have a decent vocabulary. However, I do get stuck in the regular words that I use. And when I get to talk to Diana, she's always using great words that illustrate and bring home the point with more. Oh, I'm going to make up a word now. No, so I don't want to use that one. With a great care, and it's a discipline. Would you say it's a discipline of finding the right word for the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, from a professional point of view, it's all about customer engagement, but we're engaging each other now, isn't it? The conversation, it's a game of, brinkmanship. How can we engage each other to really get through, to have a conversation that connects us on a human, personal, and also delivers a message as well. So everything, in a way, is a translation.
It is. And jumping right in, I love how you segued right into this. We're talking about translation, and I think we should start there. To you, what does translation mean?
Well, literally, it comes from the original Latin to cross over, to bring over a meaning, to carry across. And everything that we do is that process, isn't it? The process by which we convert our thoughts, intentions into words that someone else will hear, but could translate differently according to what they think they've heard. And so everything becomes a kind of Chinese whispering. And the challenge that we have in life, in our personal and professional lives, how can we limit that whispering to have clarity, consistency, and mission that means that we don't get lost in translation, but that we get found, and that our intention is heard and implemented as we would wish.
Okay, so I was talking to a new business yesterday. We're going to start here because I'm like, ooh, this has nothing to do with actual translation or messages yet. It's a journey though, and we have to understand where we are in our own journey and where the other person in our connection, in our engagement is at. And so I was having a conversation with this person, and they have this idea of what it means to build a company. So they're starting from scratch. They have all of these pieces in place. And they've even decided here's the order the things must happen for my business to succeed.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, exactly. Wow. And so I'm talking and talking, and they said, so this is where I need help on this one piece. And at first I'm like, well, I'm not sure why you're talking to me about it. So let me ask some more questions. And it turns out that there was a little bit of a misunderstanding of what I did. But even more importantly, was the questions that they had asked themselves were limited by the information that they knew. And they never sought additional information. And so I'm bringing that back to translation here because when we're talking about making that connection to crossover, we have to be open and willing. And I'm using the word have to, the two words have to right now on purpose. We have to be open. That openness is what allows us to notice that there's a gap.
Well, I mean, the approach that you describe is very inward, isn't it? It's what we know, it's what we can accept, it's based on our knowledge and experience. But really, the challenge of succeeding in life and in business is understanding the audience, understanding the market that our audience represents, and feeding into their expectations and requirements in order to speak to that need. And really, I think listing the requirements was great, but literally the starting point, that's start of a journey.
Truth.
To really understand what it is that I need to be doing in order to have the success that I want, and that's dialogue. That means,
yeah. And, so taking that one step further, and I'm going to use the word closed or maybe a vacuum is better instead of closed, because this person was not closed. They were open to ideas. They didn't realize that they were staying within a comfort zone, if you will, of their vision and the team that they were going to bring together. And so understanding the start of that journey was great. They've already gone down the path. They went down the path of, oh, I've got these milestones, and not only do I have the milestones, I know what it's going to look like, so I know I can move forward. Not everybody works like that. And one thing that came out of that in terms of your journey, the concept of journey really is that starting point was they did not recognize, they thought they could have one set of things, both for internal communication and external communication. And then within the external communication, the people that were going to refer business in and people that might come across them in their online marketing. And I was like, ooh. Okay. Now, have you ever found a business that can have one message for all those things?
No, absolutely not.
So is it common? I mean, when you're talking with business leaders and you're talking with department heads and even experienced marketing people within organizations or that are running their own marketing firms, what are the common things that you see around that limiting thought process?
Well, there's two key trends I want to talk about on that point. And the first is, this eternal problem of silos, that we see everything from our own perspective and we don't necessarily understand what's in the other department, or the person sitting next to us, etc. And that inability to connect and unify, what we're doing as a company. That's one of the challenges, and that really blocks communication. Because of course we can't connect the customer experience across each touch point of the journey. That's one challenge. And the other challenge is that, it's a sense that in the US market in particular, it is the world's largest economy, right to be proud of that. But right now, domestic growth is rather stagnated. So, so far it's if you only look to the US to grow your company, then you're losing a huge potential opportunity to a global marketplace. So really, there's two things. One, how do we overcome the silo effect? And two, how can we get out of this US-centric vision, understand there's a huge world out there that represents a great value for the company, and how do we translate those two, one challenge and one opportunity, into something that's going to work for that individual and company? Those are a couple of the trends that I see.
So let's talk about the silos that within our organizations, because we will, as an organization, so I'm using we as a gigantic organizational term here, we are only as capable as our message is clear.
Correct.
And so when you find a company who doesn't have a clear message, how do you work with those decision makers, the leaders within that organization, to help them realize?
Well, often it's not something that will happen overnight. It's a partnership and a journey. And sometimes the aha moments come when, for example, a team of directors will be locked in a room for hours on end arguing how to localize a tagline. And suddenly the aha moment isn't that translation is easy, it's that, gosh, communication is very difficult, isn't it? And the more it matters to us, the more difficult it becomes. And the more difficult it becomes, language can be quite, it can create quite some situations where people can fight a little bit about the outcome, fiercely protective of that, because language is close to personality. So you find that journey to understanding the clarity of the message is exactly that. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So what are the things that we can do to counteract this? Well, there are certain best practices and methods that are really easy to do. Things like think about your style and tone of voice, your brand guidelines, not just as look and feel, graphics, position of logos and things of that nature, but writing guidelines. What is your audience? How do we want to communicate them? What is their professional academic standing? How do we reflect that in the tone of voice of how we write? What are our most consistent messages or most important critical messages? What do we really mean by those? Can we provide a definition? And what are the other key concepts? And suddenly you've got the bones of two key things, which are the foundation of great communication. One is terminology. We agree on the words and the concepts that are critical to our business. We understand what they mean. There is a common understanding, and we've written it down so everyone can share that understanding. Secondly, we know how to wrap those key concepts in a writing style which is suitable to engage our audience. And in so doing, we encourage a common approach to the business of communication. And then within those broad statements, you have, of course, differences. The way that you'll convey marketing will be different from the way you explain product information. And so you obviously have different levels and resources and expertise who speak to the voices that are required for those, but respect that speciality, respect that we might have differences of skills related to those functions, but commonality in some concepts, and at least knowledge sharing, so that everyone is understanding the universe that we're explaining. And then the other thing that I would advise to wrap all this up would be a structure, because context in communication is everything. Let me give you a silly example. Table. It's a silly example, but think of all the words table could mean and where it would appear. As a table I'm leaning on, from a table in a book, etc., etc. So given that even with words which seem to be concrete, we can have layers of meaning depending on their context, make sure that you structure in the applicability of terms, where they're used and what governs their right usage. And also those ones you don't want to get out there. Those acronyms that grow up inside the development process that you really don't want to push out into the public arena. Mark those down as blacklisted terms as much as you want to highlight the approved ones. And if you can, come to a basic agreement of some of these core concepts and some of the, governing style, then you're on your way to defining the right language to communicate your business value and value proposition. Does that make sense?
It makes incredible sense. And so as you were talking, things are coming in and out of my mind because I work in this big space of bubbles and communication. The impression that I was left with, and the last thing that I would say tied up everything that was going through my head as you were talking, has to do with our written versus unwritten agreements. And this was something I'd love to highlight and spend a little more time on, because we do have our internal lingo that tends to seep out. And unless somebody actually says, I don't know what that means, can you tell me what that means? There's already a gap, because there's usually a fear of looking silly or stupid, or not, if you're already insecure in some way in your position or the relationship or the engage in the interaction, and now you have to say, I don't know what that is. That takes a lot of confidence and courage. And if we don't have that, or we're lacking it for some reason based off of the environment, it's hard to speak up. And I will give you a real life example. And when this actually occurred, I was so surprised, and I was like, oh man, we don't know how far our lingo goes. So like table has many layers of meaning. I said, oh, can I remember it? My dad was visiting recently, and he and his girlfriend, we were having a conversation, and she asked what I did. And I was telling her that, oh, why can't I think of the word? There were two words, and I did think of the second one. And so I'm telling her what I did, and I'm talking about facilitating conversations, and I'm doing all of these different things. And I used the word groupthink. Now, I know what that means. You may know what that means, but we don't know if we mean the same thing when I say the word groupthink. And so she said to me, so that was one of them. The other one was a little bit more of a common word. Oh, keynote. The other one was keynote. I said, I give keynote speeches. And she's like, what's a keynote? And it occurred to me, therein lies something that is, I think, common and very well known that not everybody knows. And so I immediately said to myself, note, and it's written down, which is why I could not recall it quickly, but I have to rethink the word keynote. What does that actually mean to people if you're outside of this industry? Because now I'm missing part of an audience and they don't know. And I actually really like Crystal, because she was willing to ask, because she really genuinely wanted to understand. And I thought I was speaking at a level of somebody who I was introducing to what goes on in the world of Red Direction and Voice of Bold Business Radio. And there was a gap. And so it's come back to the team to be able to process and think about it. And I think is that a good example of something where we have to recognize we might not even know our own lingo happening until we encounter it?
Yes, and think of the consequences, going back to our silo. It's not just organizational silo, but think of all the external partners, including translators who take your words and translate it into another language, literally. What is the probability of them understanding a concept which has a unique meaning for you? They don't necessarily know that unique meaning unless you've informed them of it. So I hate to say rules of engagement because it sounds so awful and administratively heavy, but essentially it is about taking ownership for documenting the value proposition and the key concepts upon which you as a professional or your company depend upon, because they're the value propositions of your brand, so that everyone who trades in those terms is using them in your currency, and that when they get translated into other languages, the intent is understood and conveyed in the appropriate language of the target market, because the same word may not apply. The words that the translator will choose will be the ones that are most appropriate for conveying what you mean, not what you say. So, somebody wise said to me once that it's not about translating the words, it's translating the gap between words. But because it's understanding, what someone really means when they say what they say, and then localizing it in a way that is sympathetic to that original intent.
Okay. And so when we discover an unwritten agreement, like, for example, this word keynote, right? That was an unwritten agreement. We decided everybody in the world knew what we meant, both internally and externally. And that was wrong. We got in our own way here. So when that became known, it is now part of further conversation. We are documenting it. We are writing it down, because we realize as an organization that that is a limiting factor that prevents us from reaching everybody that we could reach in a way that they understand.
Correct. And it doesn't have to be complex. And I know we're going to return to this perhaps later. You know, it really is a concept, a term, a definition. Mm-hmm. That's all we need to start that conversation. And then if there is a query by anyone in that conversation, be it internal, external, translator, whoever, we can ask it. But at least we have a solid reference point. And then, of course, it's very easy to then add the translation. So suddenly from a core corporate English terminology, we have all of the approved languages. And using technologies today, we can check automatically in everything we translate for these key concepts, have we localized them consistently with the version that has been approved, so that we can reuse that common idea of how that concept is expressed across all languages, which is, you know, the cornerstone of great translation. Mm-hmm. And herein lies a challenge, because, you know, I hear this argument that, well, you know, in marketing, we need to recreate words to create interest. We don't tend to reuse. Consistency can be a little boring, you know. But in our world as translators, we don't want 5 words for the same concept. We want one word to always be used in the same context, to have the same meaning, to know that that's what we're translating, that we're not swapping apples for oranges and pears, but relating to a banana. To have a right example.
Exactly. And that makes me think of, you know, sales and marketing. Why change what works? I mean, we really have to think about that. Why would we change what is working? And then, of course, if it stopped working or we're seeing less results, it's a different thing. Okay, so it's not working anymore. But when it is working, we tend to get in our own way and basically stub our toes, in the sense of, when it works, we think we can make it work more, and then we're just mucking everything up because we're getting confusing. We're using more words, and we don't realize that we might be diluting the message. That's what I hear you saying.
Correct. And think about this. Imagine, you know, you may be clear in your language, but imagine if you're localizing in 10 languages. Mm-hmm. Have the potential for that second term expressed in different words to be mistranslated into 10 languages. So you have the possibility of escalating the problem, and then for the 10 translators to have different interpretations. Maybe 5 will say, well, actually, I think Jess meant this original term, so I'm going to translate it the same way. Whereas the 5 other translators might say, no, I think Jess is trying to say something different here. So you have this opportunity for mistranslations, let's mm-hmm. call it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, everybody who's listening, we are talking about translating and taking a message in a native language and switching it into a different language that is not our native language, and creating a same connection. And we're straddling this line, because I know those people who are listening are like, well, can we get to the translation part? Can we get to the translation part? Well, here I am trying to model that there's so much thinking and there are so many elements that go into translating correctly that if we just skip to that part, we are going to overshadow major common problems that we see, feel, and experience, and that are going to show up like those big zits right before you go to prom on your nose when you're in junior high and high school. Oh, I guess it's high school when you go to prom, you know, but there's the inopportune times, and then we're reacting. We're like, what do we do? Now we're feeling insecure. Whereas when we take our time, when we think about this, we understand these common pitfalls, we understand the way these things show up, we get the importance of the simplicity. I mean, like, really get it in our being. Then we can go, okay, we can hold the space and we can bring people together and we can have this information that we can transcribe and translate for actual understanding. Because one of the things I have learned from Diana here, Diana, I have learned from you, and I know Scott has said this before too on the show, is that just because we say a word doesn't mean it's going to be understood.
Correct. And here's the great news, by the way, it's not just about quality, which essentially is what your value proposition it has to resonate quality. We have to have the finest translation that we can. But the whole greatness of content optimization is that you get to save money, you get to save time, because our goal of content optimization is something simple as clarity, simplicity, fewer words, higher level of reuse, greater consistency. And when that happens, the actual volumes of content that you will translate start to reduce. It's not uncommon through a process of simplifying your content that you could reduce the number of words by, let's say, 20 to 30%, I've seen, or that you can increase reuse. Reuse can go up to, for product information, up to 80 or 90%. So everyone gets to win. You get to spend less money, you get to have greater consistency, you have higher clarity, and ultimately a better quality product of communication that you put out there. So this investment in the original content is nothing more than something that will pay off in every department.
And until the product materially changes, it's lasting. So it's like our favorite pair of shoes when we're an adult compared to our favorite pair of shoes when we're a kid. We know we're going to grow out of them, and boy, are we going to hate that when that happens. But once we become adults and we've got this, I think it's funny. I don't know why shoes just popped into my head, Diana, but we've got a pair of shoes that we can resole. We can take to a cobbler. We can have it last and last with a little bit of love and maintenance.
Yes, I mean, investment, translation is an investment. Anything that takes off the bottom line is something to consider seriously. But if you think of it as an investment, the better the quality, the investment in the process up front, the less you will pay in the longer term. And the higher the volume of the communication will be, the fewer problems you'll have, the faster the time to market, because we'll have higher efficiency. As I said a moment ago, there's nothing to lose really here, but everything to gain. We know the mistranslations that are part of urban myths now. We surely don't want our brands and products to be, polluted with that kind, especially since, majority of us don't speak those languages. So if we're deploying foreign language content and it's wrong, what is the probability of us knowing that? Jess, it's not that you can go read your copy in English and suddenly pull out a problem. There is a trust, a relationship of trust between you and whoever may be localizing. And that relationship has to be based on quality.
Oh, yes. And it has to be based on longevity and the willingness for both parties to communicate over time, because there will be things that change over time. And I mean, okay, so, and what is your, I don't want to say favorite, because what we're going to talk about is actually a really big problem, but maybe what is the most notorious brand translation problem that has come up in the recent past that really articulates the fact that we can't take things for granted and we must have communication with our partners, our strategic partners, to get the meaning across correctly, yet it doesn't always happen?
My favorite one is, because I come from Wales, so it's close to home for me. There was a famous mistranslation of a Welsh road sign near Swansea, I think back in 2008. The English read something like "no entry for heavy goods vehicles, residential site only." Seems quite straightforward. And the translation in Welsh was, "I am out of the office at the moment. Send any work to be translated." And that was printed on the sign at the roadside for motorists, everyone passing by, to announce that the person who had handled this translation was unfortunately out of the office. And because it was in Welsh and handled by someone who didn't understand the language, it went through the process and was out there.
Oh my gosh. Now, do things, that's pretty funny. Do things like this happen? Like, let's say I wanted to go translate a blog post into French because I decided that I heard something going on in French culture and they might like the information. Can I just go to my Babelfish or my Google Translate?
A funny example, you mentioned French. I don't know where it happened. It was in a corporate context, and there was some giggling at the end in the room. It was in France because the speaker was talking about how excited they were. Of course, that had a different connotation for the French people laughing at the back. So no matter how basic and simple your language, there's no end to the misinterpretation and mistranslation, or, humorous misinterpretation that can have of your language. So the dangers of going to Google Translate or any others is that it will certainly give you the gist of what you might want to know and understand, but it certainly can't be trusted as a reliable means of communicating to your audience.
So we're talking about societal norms and how they actually come into play. We were talking about, I don't remember what we were talking about. It has escaped me, Diana. But I know we've had a conversation before about the fact that maybe the language we use, and I always get tickled by our differences in the use of words in relationship to everyday things. And that's, it's fun and we can see it. And then we don't really think about it as it applies to our clients that are here and speak English in the US as a second language, or that we're expanding overseas or have a presence overseas and don't take full advantage of. So we think it's this neat, it's cute and it's different, but we don't really give it as much weight. And I'd like to point that out in the sense that when we give it the weight, we can actually observe and see and connect at a whole different level.
I was reading recently that only 46% of Americans roughly still have passports, or did so in 2016. And of those international travelers, those few probably make multiple trips, and there are only 66 million trips internationally out of the US in 2016, and that the highest visited countries are Mexico, Canada, and Europe came, and then Asia next. I think, and I think it's true of Britain for potentially other reasons, but in the US it's a geographical challenge. It's a challenge that, there's not so much leave and holiday that allows us to do international trips unless we can do so through business. And that, unlike Britain, there's no imperial legacy that will mean that we have relationships with other countries in the world. So I think from a US perspective, it's very difficult to see outside our own reality, our own country and language. So despite the fact that there's a heavy presence of multicultural and multilingual richness within the US, I think that legacy is still a challenge to understand someone else's reality in another country. And the Lost in Translation film is a very good example of, you take a US citizen and plant them in Japan, and it's like landing, in an alien territory. And I relate to that because I visited Japan and I had the same sensation. It's this idea, how do you understand something you don't understand? So I think we're coming from this challenge of understanding something that's beyond our own experience. Do you agree, Jess?
I do. And you know what's interesting? You bring up Lost in Translation, and I did not like it. That movie, I don't know why I did not like it, but I did not like it. And once I started to not like it, it got harder for me to stay open to what this message might be, which tells me two things. One, I need to watch it again because there really is a message and there's something I need to face in there personally. Mm-hmm. Secondly, though, maybe a part of it, and I can be honest, is that I have never been to an Asian country. And so I couldn't even open myself up to the possibility that might exist, right? Like I can open myself up to the possibility that I might go to the moon, because when I was a kid, I loved astronauts and I did a lot of research and I watched a lot of astronaut movies and I wanted to go to space camps and all of these things, and I studied the stars. But it never occurred to me that I might travel to Japan one day. And in fact, I'd like to travel to Japan or other Asian countries someday. And that's part of the world I've never been to. And I couldn't make that leap. It's easier for me to imagine going to the moon than it is for me to go to Japan. How weird is that?
It's really funny. But yes, no, I was there when I first went to Japan. I had that same sense of it's something so far beyond anything that I had experienced.
Mm-hmm. And their cultural traditions, you know, there's something that I say once in a while that I'm really good at reading between the lines. And so being able to pick up some of those cultural nuances is part of it. Being able to go, oh, there's something else here. We just don't know what it is and need to find it, is very different though than when you're in a culture that is, I mean, they have traditions. Every country has traditions, and some are very prevalent in every part of life and some are not. And we have traditions here in the US. You have traditions where you are. And but how pervasive are they actually when you get into business and outside of society and into business? Because in the US we've got the strange personal and professional lives are different, and it's actually almost a societal thing, I think, where we've got this, well, we do these things in society and we do these different things in business, which I find fascinating because it's not that way in Japan from my limited experience with it. And you've been there. Would you agree?
Yes, well, let's translate this into a business context then, and
Done.
let's use Japan and the US as examples. So in Japan, there is a strong belief and need to understand where you are in an organizational structure, who is above you, who is beneath you, what is your position and role. This is really important to a Japanese business mentality. Whereas, of course, in a US-centric business environment, there is the power of being entrepreneurial, and this is quite foreign for a Japanese businessman coming to the US, and indeed perhaps US person going to Japan, and that's why exchanging business is such a challenge, and you need to understand those differences in businesses in order to make them work in both environments. That's just one example, but Japanese are very fond of structure, whereas US businesses generally value the strength of the entrepreneur. Would you agree?
I think today that's the case. I don't think historically the US has always been that way because if you think even just back to the beginning of the 1900s, where there was a big, and of course, I think our approach is different. So structure is important. And in the US, that manifested itself as efficiency. And so we went through this, how much production can we get? How many more of these things at the expense of everything else? The bottom line always came first. And I think it took us almost 100 years to start realizing, we can't do that. Physically, mentally, and emotionally, that is unsustainable at some point because it creates these gaps. And you're right, in the US, it's really interesting, and I'm going to say this out loud, and I because it's something that I'm exploring personally and just professionally watching. We've got these concepts of, and I'm going to speak also from the point of view that I have from the businesses and the individuals that I work with. We have this desire to be authentic and real and different, yet our society demands. And when you step out of line, because you're pulled back, it's pulling at you, that we're all the same, that we have the same thing. And so I think here in the US, because we have such cultural diversity in what makes the US, that when we recognize and embrace that, it's very interesting to want everybody to have the same things and to have the same opportunities, and there's a big enough pie for everybody to have what they want, yet we always want more. And so I find it's really interesting. I'm going into a whole bunch of different parts of the world and culture and my own personal beliefs and how my experiences are allowing me to talk about those beliefs, which is interesting, which is very different from, I'm sure, several of our listeners. And you maybe even.
No, I was just thinking of an example where this idea of structure is so critical. It's a funny story, I think. I was visiting a Japanese company in Germany, it so happened. And to everyone's amazement, the head manager decided to leave early for the day. This was unbelievable. No one was allowed to leave before the manager. And once the top manager left the office, then the middle manager, once the middle manager had left, then the junior managers, once the junior managers, Japanese managers, then the lower. And it was very much according to that structure. Everyone corresponded. Junior couldn't leave before middle manager couldn't, and so on. So when the senior manager was seen leaving the office, the senior Japanese manager was leaving the office, there was a rush for the door. Everyone was seen running, thinking, yeah, we got an early. Then, of course, the senior manager came back. He was just going to the gas station to fill up. And so he was only out of the office for a few minutes. And of course, everyone else ran back to the desks to make sure that, they weren't seen to be leaving before the manager. So perhaps if that example can show a little bit the difference in a Japanese culture, it's a specific example. This idea of where you are in the structure and responding to that position in the structure is quite important.
Okay, so let's take that, because when we think about the words that we use, regardless of our experiences, right, and what we think, and our experiences and our accessibility to different experiences also is vastly different around the globe. And so when what you're talking about is we really know ourselves, and we may have a voice, and we get to practice. By the way, this might be, this might be a UK thing too, where you have opinions and you just keep your mouth closed, because there's a benefit to politeness. That's where there's a benefit to politeness.
That's true. That's something that we are known for. British people.
You are. And it sounds like, though, too, there's an element of that politeness, the order of things, the expectations.
Correct.
That because somebody sat me down and said, okay, don't chew with your mouth open at the dinner table.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We got that. And that was said out loud. But there are other things, or here's how you set the table in our house. This is how you set the table to have a nicely set table when you're entertaining and making these connections with whomever. But at the same point in time, that's very different than the etiquette you have when you go on a business dinner with somebody, right? And the things that you do, and so and the way you're perceived. And so it's very interesting that it sounds like this hierarchy. And I'm sure I like place and space better than hierarchy, because sure, there's a hierarchy, but there's also that they're basically just exemplifying the respect that goes with the structure that they have created.
Correct.
And that's the same with as simple as table manners.
Yes, correct. So it's the way, for example, a Japanese business person will present their business card with both hands, not just one hand. That you won't turn your back on somebody you're introducing, that you'll back away, that you'll bow, for example, and the deeper you bow, the greater the respect. So that's very well, you picked up on that very well, Jess. That's an essential element of that conversation.
Do you think they have, unless I was learning what the culture was, when I am raised in a culture, there are things we just don't say. We just learn, right? Like in the pervasive politeness in the UK, those are things you just learn that. And and in the US, I know there are some, and holy cow, everybody who's listening, share. What are these things that nobody talks about that we always do? Because I'm now thinking about it so big, I'm unable to bring it home right now. But I think that's important to think about, because it allows us to show up in a particular space. And when we better know where we're at, we better understand that somebody else may not be able to explain why they do what they do or use the words that they use. And it's up to us to gain understanding. We must take that responsibility.
Yes, it's finding the space to be respectful of values that perhaps are not our own within a culture that's different to us, because those faux pas that might happen, those mistakes that might happen through misunderstanding or underestimating, have a deeply professional implication, don't they?
Yes.
Understanding what the market opportunities, the barriers that might be to business, be they practical, regulatory, cultural, or simply a different audience in the market, a different audience for our products and services. Unless we can understand and respect that audience, how can we sell our services and be professional in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then the challenge from a professional point of view was, who can I trust to share this knowledge that I don't already know? You know, if I may be a smaller business wanting to expand in a market that I don't personally know, I'm not involved in, you know, who's going to give me that insight?
Right. Okay,
So,
everybody listening, this is the Voice of Bold Business Radio, where I get to talk with Diana Ballard today about being lost in translation. And I have to say that my brain is expanding. And if you've been listening, as you have been, you know, I am having trouble like being right here as I'm expanding really big and coming back to the point and expanding really big, which means my brain is working very hard. And so I want to say thank you to that, Diana, because I love it when my brain is stretched, when my experience that I have can be expanded by the experience that you have and your willingness to share it. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here. I also want to jump in. You have fans on on YouTube. So just so you know, they're shouting out to you and saying, Diana, yay, you're awesome. So you've got that. The other thing is, we're moving in this direction, and we're talking about culture, and we're talking about our native awareness and our need to be open. There's a question that has come in, and that is, companies, they know in theory that language and localization is important, but in practice, they seem to just stick to their native languages and let everybody else come to that native language to get the message. And knowing that we have a global world and knowing that we have businesses and products and services that will help these people, how can we start changing that and opening the door more to being able to build trust with a partner that can enable us to reach other markets?
Well, first of all, we need to understand what the opportunity is and look at the US economy right now. It is the world's largest economy, but domestic growth has stagnated. But the rest of the world has been picking up. You know, corporate America has the strongest earnings season in 13 years, and that's in no small reason due to a weaker dollar fueling global growth overseas. So we really want to get our heads around this problem in order to make our businesses grow, because if we expose ourselves only to the opportunities of America, we miss the bigger opportunity of the global marketplace. And if that's not enough, just take into consideration this, that of the S&P 500 companies that generate more than half their revenue overseas, they're posting quarterly earning growth of around 20% on average. And that's double the growth of companies doing most of their business domestically in the US market. So never have the stakes been higher for us to get internationalization right. I think one of the challenges why we don't, and I speak as a Briton as well as perhaps I'm visiting the US often, so I kind of feel American too.
Good.
Share that.
Welcome. Yes.
Is that everyone speaks English, don't they, Jess?
It depends. We leave the U's out, but other than that, yes.
And did you know that 96% of the world's population actually don't?
That, I did know that. It's still a surprising statistic when you say it.
Yeah, it's quite staggering how little we do know, even though we've been the world's powerhouses when it comes to economy, business, and growth. You know, when it comes to reaching out to those other areas, actually, we probably don't know as much as we need to know. So if we come from that, the position of humility, I think we're in a stronger position to understand what we need to do. So maybe we can look at that next.
And, well, even when you say that out loud, okay, and I want to make sure I've got the statistic right in my head. 96% of the world does not speak English.
Correct.
So
not as first tongue, as a mother tongue.
As their mother tongue. So
Correct.
4% of the whole world speaks English as a native language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so basically that means that in this world where technology is making us more connected than ever before. The fact that time zones matter less because we get to do this. I mean, you're over there and I'm over here and we're separated by an ocean, and we can still see each other and have a show and live stream it on the internet. And there are businesses that, they don't recognize that that is an opportunity, first of all. Second of all, I used to speak another language, but I have not practiced it. And so I have lost it. And what I'm hearing you say is, like, as a business leader, I own my own business, my team that works with me, we're all doing the same thing, that provided we took some time, since everybody, and I take this for granted. I take for granted that even though only 4% of the globe speaks English natively, that a whole lot more than that have learned English to work with the UK and America and Canada and other English-speaking countries. And how cool is that? Yet, at the same time, how arrogant is that?
Well, yeah.
I got to point that out. I'm like, man, I take this for granted. There's a little bit of arrogance there. And I'm not the only one. And
Sure.
So when we think on an organizational scale, we were talking about the investment earlier, the investment, that it is an investment. So if I'm even thinking about this as a leader in a company, maybe the head of a marketing department, and I'm going, oh yeah, we could totally reach these people and I could help sales and increase this sales team here by doing this one thing. Do you have like a few questions that can help define exactly what somebody needs in a strategic partner? Or maybe a different way to say that would be, how do we decide if our organizational culture is ready?
First of all, think about the mission. I mean, there's the famous quote by Nelson Mandela. I think you've heard that when you speak to a man in a language that he understands, it goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. So assuming now that we're in the age of experience management and really engaging customers so that it goes to their heart, then communication and language has to be a corporate strategic goal. So, the first thing would be, don't think of localization and translation as an afterthought, as an oversight, something that happens over the wall at the end of the process. Make it part of your strategic imperative. If growing your company internationally is a core strategy, make sure that the process of that matches rather than it catching up towards the end of the process and risking disappointment. So first of all, make it a C-level objective. Then really think about, well, which markets? Do they all work in the same way? Which are the best ones for my products and services? Is the audience the same? Will my brand, style, tone of voice, etc.? And to do that, to identify that market opportunity, you'll need some local insights, some partners, dealers, agents, distributors, whoever, who understands your industry, understands the locale, and can give you that fast track so that you are informed. This is the right market. This is where I need to be. I potentially have a competitive advantage. I know who the competitors are. Great. Then connect everyone in the company that is involved in customer experience management, from first touch to after sales. Make sure that they're connected in a conversation, so the content is connected, so that when it's localized, it will also have the same target effect as the US English. And make sure that that experience also works. There's a process that we refer to as internationalization. It means, is my content globally ready? Have I thought about currencies? Have I thought about date and time? Practical, simple things through to more complex regulatory and other requirements. Have I thought through all of those challenges? And then finally, once you've overcome those practical barriers, think about language partner. Think about who can translate my message as I intended, and who can I trust to run the ball. The last thing that you want is to invest in a great process of market discovery to have a poor translation result that could end up in a mistranslation that doesn't do justice to the effort. So native translators, mother tongue, based in a target country, who understand your industry, who are willing to partner with you to be trained on your products, company, and services. See that as something that's an investment by them, not just an investment by you. And once you have that partnership, grow together, because as you said, language evolves, products change. It's a journey with your supplier and your partner to go on that journey, and to make sure that you constantly, correcting and improving how you do business. And that will give you a multicultural diversity, different perspectives from which you view your product, which can only strengthen your ability to research and develop and to mature your offering to a global marketplace. So that's the message, really, that language doesn't have to be a barrier, but it can be something that can enrich your company, not just because you have new markets, but because you have different perspectives to grow a stronger brand.
And I'm going to come back to something that you said that you alluded to. So you switched and inserted in here, we started talking about content and message. Yet when you're describing this process, there was an element of the consumer experience after they make the connection. And so not only is it making sure that the connection is able to be made in a different language than our native language, it's also what is the experience we're going to give them, and how do we give them that experience with the cultural nuances that they want, from the beginning of that first connection to the end of having a successful transaction and longer term customer, and expanding, basically lengthening the customer lifespan.
Absolutely. And being respectful, coming back to that lovely word, that not all markets and audiences will experience your product and brand in the same way. And knowing and respecting that is part of the strength of you as a global brand, let's say.
Okay, and that's a great place to end, because here my brain just went, ooh, let's talk for another hour on just that. We cannot be all things to all people in our own language, let alone anywhere else, right? Diana, okay. I don't want to stop this Voice of Bold Business radio program, and we are out of time. And in respect for you and understanding your time commitment for taking the time to join in and listen in, understanding Diana's commitment of time to come and share information and have this conversation and expand our brains a little from, well, you learned a lot about my actual experience in the world and how little it is. And it's interesting because as traveled and as experienced as I think I am, each experience I have tells me how much more I don't know. So it's this search for knowledge just is expanding all of the possibilities of all of the things that there are to learn, and being able to prioritize that and being able to bring that into business and go, okay, so how does this affect my company? Maybe at the most starter level is, are we clear internally, and are we communicating with the team in the language that we use every day effectively? And then being able to take that one step further and say, okay, this translation, how is it being understood, and how is our marketing and sales team using it? And where are those breaks in the process that can allow us to have the connection we want and have a good customer experience all the way through? And then being able to go, okay, we've decided we're a global market and we're ready to expand there, or we are a global market and we are not seeing the growth that we want, and we need to do better. And our mission and our goals include doing better in these other markets where English is not the native language. What can we do? And Diana, she put together a whole process. So rewind, watch that whole last segment again, because she laid it out where it needs to be in the priority list. Where do we touch those points? And when are we supposed to think about it? And how do we deliver the experience all the way through? Because we're in this for more than a transaction. We're in this for an experience, and we are in this for a long-term relationship between the customers that we can serve and the solutions that our company can provide our customers. You are listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, and this is program 103. I love it, 103. You'll be able to find all the program notes for this at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com/P103. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 103. You can also search Lost in Translation. We have so much information here. You have watched, you have listened. Please make sure, leave a comment, use the hashtag BBB Radio. Tell us what you like and subscribe. Subscribe so that every Tuesday and Thursday, no, that's actually not right. It's Tuesday and Fridays, we can get you new content immediately delivered to your queue so that it's automatically ready to go. You don't even have to think about it. You will get to hear people like Diana share and expand not only my brain, but your brain so that we can rethink our thinking. And remember, don't get lost in translation.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.